All right, so today we are looking at the how to synthesize sources when you're working on a lit review. So there's going to be a little quick info about your lit review. I don't know if everybody here is from nursing. Other a lot of other classes might require a lit review. But I know that nursing 4050 does. So for sure, we're going to be going over some of that. So if anybody is new to the idea of lit review, this will hopefully explain it. And then I'm going to get a little kind of granular on some ways to pull your information together, lay it out for yourself so that the lit review makes sense and you can kind of grab information that you need and then start working to synthesize all of your sources. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see that. So this workshop is going to be about getting that lit review written, which may be the biggest part. I know that PICO questions are probably the first part of nursing research, but then writing a lit review based on those. So just a couple of things just to refresh anybody's memory if they need to. So the lit review is something that you do when you're researching to basically see what's out there. So not to read off of my slides here, but the lit reviews are essential to identify, appraise, and synthesize research to implement evidence into nursing practice. And again, if you're not in nursing, insert whatever it is that you might be working with. A literature review is the process of finding relevant research sources, critically appraising these sources, synthesizing the results, and developing an accurate and complete reference list. So you may have a set amount of sources that you need to look for. You're going to be using your PICO questions to find these sources and figure out what's going on around the research world with your topic. And you're going to be looking to see how they speak to each other. So we're going to say that a lot here. The most important thing to remember when you're doing a literature review is that you're looking to see how resources are in conversation with each other. So why do we do that? So you're going to be writing a summary of what you find, but then you're going to be looking to see what those sources are saying about your topic. So you might notice a certain pattern or a certain theme that's coming out of all of the research on your PICO question. I'm not even going to try to pull examples off the top of my head, but if you're talking about nurse burnout or something like that, you're going to be looking, depending on your question, for various ways that nurse burnout is being addressed, and specifically for how you've shaped your research question. And then you're going to look and see, okay, this source says this, but here's two sources that have come at it from a completely different angle. But wait, this fourth source is in agreement with the first source, and so on. So you're looking for these themes and patterns. You as the researcher are looking for maybe the gaps, things that haven't been answered, things that are inconsistent. Almost always, there's always a suggestion for more research needed because the sample sizes are either too small or they're, they haven't ranged far enough or whatever. But either way, you're getting in there and you're looking to see what the conversation is about your particular topic. So as you're doing this, there are a couple of things to note. You're reviewing something that has already been researched or written. I'm assuming you're using scholarly nursing journals. You're giving text, context, and background so that your readers understands what's happening in with your research question. So the necessary context, the necessary background information. You are showing what you already know and kind of how you would interpret the findings. Um, Hopefully you're creating a new perspective on it then. So maybe you're coming at it and as you're answering this PICO question, you're finding answers here. It's also a guide for your research. So again, you're kind of starting out, you're explaining what your research question is and how you're going to be doing that. And we're going to see what a great scholar you are and what an expert you're about to become on whatever the topic is that you've chosen. So I do want to reiterate that idea that you're entering a conversation. But there's a Kenneth Burke, who is a rhetorician, I guess we could call him, and he talks about this idea of going into a cocktail party and everybody's talking about something. And you come in and you're listening to the conversation, and maybe you get into the conversation. This goes on for a little while. Somebody leaves the conversation, somebody comes back into the conversation. You may go out of the conversation. And that's what we're working with here. You're looking to see that your sources are the people at the cocktail party, in other words. So your sources are researching, working. Some more people have looked at their research and they're adding to it. Some people have moved on from that topic. You're coming in there and you're going to speak to those sources in the same way. Okay, so these are, again, I'm just sort of warming up into the whole idea of the lit review. So when you're creating this lit review, a couple of things. Is the author reliable? In other words, are they credible? Do they have some kind of credentials behind them? Where are you getting this information from? Most likely you are being asked to look at something that's fairly new, that is from a peer-reviewed journal. So those are usually reliable sources. And you're just looking then to make sure that whatever these people are talking about, it's backed up by credible evidence and isn't just their opinions. What is the evidence that's being used and how did they use it? So for those of you that have already looked at done some research papers or looked at research articles, you know that they all kind of follow a pattern. There's a abstract and an introduction and the methodology, who's their demographic, how are they collecting this data, how big is the sample, what's the setting for the example, all of the sort of minutia of getting the research taken care of. And therefore, maybe where then are some of the, biases or just maybe limitations? Does the author know about the limitations? And are they kind of upfront about how, the possibility that this sample size or this particular method, can only do so much? And then are there other things? This is kind of where you come in, where are the things that haven't been addressed and why haven't they been addressed? So you're kind of looking for all of those things as you're looking into the sources that you've chosen to work with. So that's kind of the whys and the wherefores of the lit review. So now I'm going to kind of jump into the idea that you are going to have this information and you have to do something with it. So one of the first things that we suggest is to get some kind of a matrix together. Now I'm going to show you a couple of different examples, and I don't want to overload anybody. The main thing is to think about being able to lay out your information from each of these particular sources in a way that helps you see the limitations or see the gaps or see the agreements or the disagreements. So I'm going to show just a couple of ways to do that. As your instructor can tell you what they will or will not want you to do. But I guess my whole point in showing this is just to give you the idea, give you the tools to create a way of keeping track of your sources, and hopefully kind of, there's heavy verbiage in these things. So, being able to pull out the most important parts that you need in order to write this lit review. So this is just a simple table. I think it's a formatted table, which can be done, whether you're using Google Docs or using Microsoft, by creating a table, labeling your columns, and deciding how you want to lay out your information. So this one gives you a source. It gives you writer's thesis as the main sort of ideas. As you pull the information out of, let's say, all of your sources, you can find the agreements and the disagreements, or just maybe even what's being pursued. Like, for example, I'll show you an example of that in a second. Or maybe they've come to similar conclusions, or maybe they are looking at different things, but in a different, coming from a different angle. And then how does it relate to your thesis? So this is one example of how to do this. Again, this is like a table. This is another table, and this kind of switches it a little bit. So you've got your sources across the top, and you've got, instead of having the agreement and disagreement, this would be very complete for you, but I wanted you just to see this whole idea. So where the main ideas are, you might think of that as the themes or the patterns you're noticing. So I'm going to go back to the nurse burnout. If you're noticing a pattern of regular schedules, or you're noticing a pattern of long work hours within those particular articles, you can see what each source says about those main ideas. And I'm just going to give you just a quick example. Again, this one has nothing to do with nursing, so I just wanted you to see how it works, though. So here are some themes down the side, and here are what each of the sources says about them. And it also is a good way to collect your information, be ready for when you are going to be doing your in-text citations, etc. This is another way to do one. This is an Excel or a Google sheet, and you're basically creating your columns and your rows the way you'd like them to be. So maybe you've got an in-text citation here. Maybe you talk about the source. Here's the argument. Here's the evidence. Here's some other notes. There's a lot of things you can do here to play around with it. For each one, you could put in a row that kind of puts your notes in, or adds different information. So there's various ways that you can collect your information, but the whole point of it is to kind of be concise, pull out what's important, and see what you can see visually. Now, if you don't work that way, there are other ways to do it. If you are an old-fashioned index card person, that might work for you too. But if you're doing a lot of things online, this can be really helpful. And you get some of the work done ahead of time. You've got in-text citations. You have your APA reference, and you're kind of ready to go, and you know where everything's coming from. And you can add to this, you can subtract it, you can use as much as you want. And again, if you've been asked to do something in a certain way, you're always going to do what your instructor tells you to do. Okay, so this is the part where it gets a little bit harder, but I think the more you do it, the easier it's going to get. So one of the things you want to be careful of in a lit review is you're not just summarizing articles. So you're evaluating them in terms of what the research provides. So do you think that the research is strong, or do you think that there's a lot of weaknesses in it? I mentioned earlier that a lot of times whenever you read these, I'm making a joke of it, but they always need more research. They always have too small of a sample. There's often that problem with trying to get research done. And I'm not making fun, for good reason. I'm sure that it's difficult to get some of this information. On the other hand, they may have a very sort of robust, set of participants and information and, demographic ranges or whatever that would be. So that's something to look for. And then again, that idea of looking for the patterns and themes to emerge to see what is happening with that topic. So the sources might be talking about the same thing, and maybe they have the same results, or maybe they have contrasting results, or maybe it's a little bit of both. Or they may be coming at it, and I'll show you an example of this, at it from a different point of view or from a different angle, or they might be using somebody else's information and they're going to, add this extra piece to it to see what happens. So that's all the stuff that you are just going to want to be paying attention to as you're looking at your various sources that you're finding. All right, so again, the lit review is not a series of summaries of your sources. I call this the source tour or the source parade. So you want to be sure that you're not just kind of saying, okay, source A says this, but source B says this, and source C says this. So you're wanting to really pull the details and look to see, again, how they speak to each other. So here is an example of synthesizing the evidence. So here's a sample Pico question. How does playing music while studying impact performance on an exam? Okay, so the sources that are being used for this are trying to address this particular Pico question. So this is sort of the summary from 4 different articles. There are various sources here that are talking about decibel level. But there's another source, the 4th source, that isn't talking about decibel level. They're talking about not playing music at all. So they're still in that realm of, how does music help studying? But, a few of them are addressing decibels, and one of them is addressing not playing anything. And then within the decibel information, it's talking about various things about decimals. So you might want to look at similarities, how the sources agree with each other. You might look at contrast, how they support like your point, but in different ways. How accumulation, how they build off of one another, or causation, how one source discusses the effects of another source's idea. The other thing to remember when you are getting ready to actually discuss the information is to remember the 3-part quote. Basically, you never just want to drop information into a paragraph without setting it up first and then explaining it later. So the first thing you want to do is when you're getting ready to use your information, whether it be a direct quote or a paraphrase, that you introduce it or put it into context in some way. You might use transition words. So you might be introducing it when you're going to be sort of full on talking about it. But once you start working with the rest of the sources, you're going to want to make sure you use those transition words to show the relationships, whether the relationship is a connection or a disconnection. Present your material, again, whether it's a quote or a paraphrase, and then you're going to want to make sure you explain the significance of that source and why you're using it there. So here's how you might put it together, how you might synthesize it. So various aspects of music can have an impact on exam performance. Tite et al. And Taprisi et al. Found that playing music loudly above 120 decibels hindered exam performance. The mind cannot retain the information as well because the brain is competing with what to focus on and what to retain. And again, that's Tite et al. Period, and also Taprisi. So those are 2 sources that were pulled, and they have kind of similar findings, similar focus, so similar study. In contrast to these findings, Pickett et al. Focused on studying with no music playing. Through scores on the exams, the study showed that having no music at all inhibited performance on an exam. Participants also commented that their minds tended to wander more and they would lose their focus on what was being studied. So this is a different focus. So we're not just looking at Pickett's and talking about what they did. We're talking about how how this contrasts to Tite et al. And to Parisi et al. And so specifically using that in contrast, transition words, and then talking about the findings, and then showing what happened, explaining why it's being used there. And then for this fourth source, Bodine et al., music has been shown to improve studying, but with stipulations. And this was shown by Bodine et al. With a study that focused on playing music at 45 decibels. The study also emphasized that the music needed to be the choice of the participant. For example, a person who hates classical music would not benefit from playing that type of music. So same overall topic, playing music while studying, what works, what doesn't. So in this case, there's kind of the addition of not only decibel level, but music choice. So this is one way to do this where you're not just saying, Tite et al. Says that playing music above 120 decibels hindered exam performance. DePrisi agreed. Pickett disagreed. Bodine did something else, right? So kind of really examining the sources of what they say and trying to keep making those connections and seeing where they're connecting, where they're not. Hopefully, then being able to pull it together to come up with some kind of assertion that you can make for your own research for whatever your PICO question is. All right. You can find us at the Academic Support Center. We are now, I believe, 7 days a week. I work on Saturday mornings. I know. Amanda, do you work on Saturday afternoons?
I do Sundays.
Okay. Oh, Sundays. Okay. So we're open on Saturday and Sunday. There's somebody working usually at least till 9 o'clock during the week. Sometimes Zoom. Often there's somebody in the office as well. So, and I think our first appointments are at 9 o'clock in the morning. So, we are available whenever you guys need us.